Hi, welcome to the 6th lesson of fiction and poetry. Finally, the conclusion. And that is just exactly what it is. This is where we conclude. This is where our characters have really changed, and this is where we're really looking at them. Are they better for having gone through things? Are they worse? Are they dead? Did you kill them? Maybe. Maybe. That's what some people prefer to do. That's perfectly fine. But this is where we start getting back into normal, or the new normal, as our characters may have to deal. This is something that they may have to deal with, is a brand new way of having normal. This is where our characters go back to their lives, having gone through this adventure, or having gone through this awful series of events, depending on, how kind you've been to your characters. But, like I said, this is the conclusion. So, let's look back at Dracula. We've made it through the entire thing. Now we are concluding. Now what is our conclusion? Dracula is killed, right? Also, Quincy Morris dies, which is very upsetting. That's bad. So, the final fight occurs during which Quincy Morris, who is a vampire fighter, is stabbed in the side, but he is able to stay alive long enough to kill Dracula, and then he dies a noble death, right? Mina is healed, which is incredible because they were going to kill her. That was the plan. But she's healed. And everyone else lives happily ever after. While this is something that we normally try to shy away from, Bram Stoker was actually able to pull off a pretty decent happy ending. And honestly, after having read that story, you kind of feel like you deserve one. So, let's look at that for a second. If we're looking at a conclusion where everyone lives happily ever after, was it a successful story? Maybe. Maybe if you're 5, yeah, that works. Sometimes if you're an adult. However, the reason why it works with Bram Stoker's Dracula is because a lot of people died already. We've already been through the horror. We've already been through that enormous change of events where letting some of them live happily ever after is okay. That's fine. Let's look at some other conclusions though. Let's take, for example, our cheerleader one last time, and then I promise I'll leave this one alone forever. Let's look at our cheerleader. Let's say that after she's been caught with the faculty member, she decided to run away, okay? Our new conclusion for her is that she has to live on her own. Maybe she is walking down a highway in Arizona and she's all by herself and she has to now create this new normalcy for herself that is so extremely different from what she is used to. This is something that is so extremely different from where she thought her life was going. Let's take a look at if she had run for president. Okay, so if she was running for class president, let's say she wins, and thus she has a scholarship where she's going to a college that she didn't think that she would go to. I don't know. Series of events. So this might change her life completely too. This might be a university that she wasn't planning on, so this is a new normalcy for her. So there are tons of different ways that we can look at our conclusions. We can make them good, we can make them bad, but no matter what, we do need to make them believable. If our characters suddenly decide that they don't like their normalcy and they're going to change it for themselves immediately, that's not usually believable. If we're working with a character such as those in The Clockwork Orange, possibly. Possibly. If we're working with some of those crazier characters, it might work out that way. This is what we refer to as a twist ending, something that is a little different from what we would expect, something that is different from what we would think that character is going to do. A lot of movies really enjoy the twist ending. Children's stories, however, do not enjoy the twist ending. This is something that we are definitely trying to teach children about growing and changing and being able to learn from one's experiences. Therefore, twist ending would kind of throw off the child if all of a sudden in Goldilocks and the Three Bears, they decide to let Goldilocks stay. Let's say all of a sudden they decide to let her stay. That does not seem like something that they would do. Another situation is, let's say that she decides that she now wants a bear fur coat. This does not seem like something that Goldilocks would do either, right? No. Now it's a horror story. Now it's terrifying. So this doesn't make sense. Our conclusions do need to make sense, at least to a point, unless we are doing a twist ending. So in this case, definitely keep your audience in mind. Definitely keep the lesson of your story in mind. While your story is not required to have a lesson, and while a lot of stories do not have a very straightforward lesson, it is very important to keep it believable. So let's think about this. If we're looking at any other story with conclusion, this is where we have finally made it back to normalcy. We've made it all the way up to the climax, we've come down the mountain, and now we've actually flattened out. This is the valley. This is where we actually get to take a breather and conclude our story, right? So let's look at that character that you created in that very, very first lesson. Let's look at that character you created when you were looking at a magazine. Okay, so what would the conclusion of that story be? I know I was talking about a character named Olivia, and she has moved on to be with upper society, and she's with all of these people in this fantastic place, and she's going to move on with her life. Can I come up with a conclusion? Not really, no. Why is it that I'm able to come up with a conclusion for our cheerleader? Because we have followed her through all of the steps, right? It's extremely important to make sure that you actually do follow through each individual step. If you don't do so, then your story is going to fail. Unfortunately, it's far too weak. Looking back through all of the different portions that we have discussed, you do need to keep in mind that if you're missing any single part of it, then yeah, your story is going to be very weak. That being said, try not to build up too much on any one individual part. If you develop your characters too thoroughly, which it is possible, then we focus far too much on the character. We're not focusing whatsoever on the story itself. If you have far too many complications, obviously, it's too complicated. It's too hard to follow along and figure out what you're talking about. Also, if the climax is far too long, if the resolution is too difficult. These are all things that you need to keep in mind, because if you don't have each individual piece, then obviously your conclusion isn't going to make sense. So, let's look at the conclusions in some other stories. Let's look at a conclusion in Rapunzel. The very end of Rapunzel, yes, things have been resolved. Either the prince has come and rescued her, or she has killed the witch, or any number of other things occur, right? Usually those two, dependent upon the piece that you are reading. It's usually those two. But the very end, the conclusion, is where she will most likely go off and marry the prince. And here, of course, is the happily ever after. If we're looking at Little Red Riding Hood, she goes off, and this is another everyone lives happily ever after, right? The huntsman comes and kills the wolf and gets her grandmother out of the stomach of the wolf, and everyone lives happily ever after. This is our conclusion. The reason why this is so believable, especially for children's books, is because we don't want to horrify them, right? No, we don't. We don't want to terrify the children. However, as adults, we're not going to read stories like that. So when you're looking at your conclusion, try not to make it too simple. While it is reliant upon your resolution and the manner in which and the point to which your characters have developed and learned, your conclusion should never be too easy. It should come to you naturally. Again, do not force it. This is something that is extremely important, especially for your story. You want to end strongly. You want to end with your characters having learned, having grown, and having now accepted or moved on, or are able to get into a new sense of normalcy or back to the original normalcy. But if it's not believable at the end of your story for everyone to return back the way that it was before, like we've seen in so many episodes of TV shows, then don't force it. The reasons why that works for TV shows is because, first of all, they have lots of writers working on those, right? Second of all, because they usually don't want to make it too linear for you to have to watch every single episode. And third of all, because it is far easier to write something back the way it was and to use a set the way that it was before, right? We don't want to change our characters too much in those situations. But when we're writing a novel, when we're writing any lengthy piece, it's perfectly fine to have our characters completely change over or to move over into a brand new normalcy. So keep in mind, your conclusion shouldn't completely change everything, but it is closure. It's closure for your character, it's closure for your reader, and it's closure for the situation and a return to normalcy.